Good morning once again, and thank you for staying tuned to Sunrise at Sea. Welcome to the Twitter Jabs too, and today we are discussing and continuing the conversation, and that is taxation of digital platforms and services in Uganda. Well, I had the first interaction with Shiva Nauma in the Twitter Jabs one and brought you your insight, your input on what you thought on it. And now I continue the conversation with an expert, and I'm talking to Mr. Alan Muhereza, and he's the team leader at Youth for Tax Justice Network. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, and thank you for having me, and good morning to our viewers.
All right, thank you for honoring our invitation. It's nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.
So before we dive into the conversation, I'd like you to please tell the viewer what your mandate is at Youth for Justice Network.
At Youth for Tax Justice Network, what we do basically is engage young people in participating and influencing decisions around resource mobilization, allocation, and utilization across the continent. So basically what this is that we engage young people to engage governments on how governments raise their monies. And you know, one of the biggest ways government raise money is through taxation. Yes. But there are other ways. So what we do is engage young people on how best governments can raise resources, allocate them, and allocation goes through the budget process, and then of course utilize them. So you can allocate them but not utilize them in the way you've said you've allocated them. So that is the entire chain where we engage young people to be part of those decisions within their government. So, and like I said, resource mobilizations around taxation, around debt, around natural resource revenues, and everything in between. We are based here in Uganda, but we have chapters in 6 other countries.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to know, what is your take on URA's move to start taxing non-resident digital companies and service providers in Uganda? What's your take on that?
I would first I say it ordinarily will not be a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I think this has been in the make for quite some time. And this was because business is shifting. Monies are moving from what you would call normal traditional business models to digital and internet-based models. And we've seen this because if you look at, for example, the 10 most if you look at the 10 most valuable companies, for example, in the world, 7 of them are digital companies or digital service providing companies. So what that means is that almost all the business, almost all the money, almost everything is happening online. And when you look at our taxation sort of rules or principles, is that you tax somewhere. There are 2 rules that they use for taxation. It's either source, where the person is getting the money from, or residency, or where they are best to do their business. So what happened is that when now everything went online, revenue authorities, especially not even just URA, across the world, could not now tax people based on, for example, their residency, because you could have a non-resident do business in Uganda and you cannot tax them. You cannot tax them as a resident of Uganda, yet they are doing business in Uganda. The second would be that even when you look at source, they are very source income that, you know, as a resident, Ugandan resident, sometimes you actually all the time you're taxed even on income you've not sourced in Uganda. So you could maybe, when you're declaring your income, you declare income you've got from Kenya, from where. So it became hard for example, for you to, and there are rules for some of those source and all that. So this has been happening because now I will give an example that you would, for example, open up your shop at home, put it in your garage, open up a Facebook page, advertise, and someone orders, you send them maybe the shoes or address, and in that interaction there is no government. But you're making money, and other people and why this is important also. So the idea is that a lot is happening. If you look at, for example, statistics, by 2019 over 80 trillion Uganda shillings was going through mobile money and other sort of digital payments or service providers. So what that meant that almost all the money now is is within e-commerce, is within digital platforms, is within fintechs, is within. So to have everyone pay their fair share of tax, there have been conversations at a global level to see how do we get certain people to pay tax, especially when you're not a resident in that country. Because when you're a resident, it becomes easier. You must have registered, you must have spent a number of days within the country. So it becomes easier to tax a resident. If you're not, it becomes hard, and yet you're making money or you are creating value within that country. So two things. One, it has been long overdue that eventually we're going to get here. Maybe the question now would be, how do we do it? And I think right now the target is the big companies, because like I said, even when the entire economy shut down in the last 3 years of the pandemic, those about 7 companies made over 80 billion, about 70 billion in revenue.
Yes.
When everyone else is not working, when everyone else is not. Yeah, so I think, well, it is a good move from a perspective of collecting revenue, especially from those people or from companies that are not resident here. And so that is where we start from. Of course, the idea is that eventually we will have everyone that is doing business online, we will have everyone that is having or creating value in one or the other pay. But like I said, and since it is VAT we're talking about, collection of VAT is usually not as hard as other taxes. So it's most likely going to work because like I think Bosa I saw online said that the risk of non-compliance is higher.
But you see, there's a bit of concern. Because he went on and even tweeted and said, and he's the spokesperson of URA, he said, on the enforcement mechanism right now, the measure is largely reliant on trust between this big corporation, the entities, and URA. And then he goes on to say that the reputation and risk of non-compliance by these non-resident service providers outweighs the reason for them not to comply. So we are just banking on trust. Well, we are going to leave our economy in the hands of just trusting that somebody is not going to, deter from this.
Actually, when you look at our taxation mechanism in Uganda, has always been on trust basis. They tell you to file your returns, you declare the amount you've made. It has always been on trust.
I see why it has got us.
Of course, no. Of course, because it will still also be hard to really, in terms of administrative, in terms of administration and cost, to come and audit everyone. Are you telling the truth? But even when we've been at that point, URA has been able to collect about 25 trillion, let me say.
Yes.
From a very small tax base. That is there are about 2.4 million taxpayers on the register. And of those, I think about 1.3 are the active taxpayers. So you can imagine that out of 1.3, we are getting about 20 trillion or 25 trillion. That is a lot of money. But of course, what that also means is that the burden on those people is very high, on those persons, on those people and companies. So yeah, but what I was trying to say is that our system has always been based on trust. That we tell you, file your returns, tell us how much you've made, then we shall say, okay, according to what you've told us, pay this sort of tax, or pay this amount of tax. But to go back to the multinational companies, and I think this is where the most important bit is that they create or derive value from operating from within the country. And I think since about 2018 up to now, I think it is just being operationalized, but the conversations have been ongoing for a very long time. The idea is that, for example, I'll give an example of Facebook, because I saw a lot of comments on Facebook.
Yes, exactly.
Facebook may not even may be banned in Uganda, but it will create value because it has subscribers in Uganda. People will advertise with Facebook, not because I've created any value or I've put content there, but because they will say we have 2 million, for example, Facebook users in Uganda. And someone will advertise through Facebook based on that value, based on just me holding an account with Facebook. So And I think that's where Bosa comes from, to say that the risk of non-compliance will be higher, because why would you not want to have that value? Leave alone us that do direct adverts on Facebook, where you pay and promote a post and that. There are companies, there are search engines that will pay for data, what you like, which posts do you like, advertising companies. So by the mere fact that you have a Facebook account, that's already value for these companies. The mere fact that you go and like someone's post, that is value. But I have hope. I am also hopeful that this will work eventually. And why this is important is because that's where the money is. Like I said, if you look at the money, for example, Facebook makes in a year is bigger than our entire economy, times like 2 times or 3 times. So this is where the money is. Of course, the questions and the conversations around the inclusive framework, the OECD inclusive framework on how do we tax companies that have a global presence.
Yes.
But when you go to taxation, they're only taxed in where they are registered or where they are headquartered. That conversation. And so the question would be that Facebook makes all that money. It goes to Ireland, where it's registered.
Yes.
And it almost pays 0 taxes because of the incentives. But you have needs as a country. You have, and like I said, this is where the money is. So about the trust, well, our entire taxation system is based on trust.
Based on trust. Well, to give you some statistics on how many internet users are in Uganda, well, there are 12.16 million internet users in Uganda, and that is as of January 2021. And the number of internet users in Uganda increased by 1.5 million between the year 2022 and 2021. I guess the pandemic had something to do with this. And well, internet penetration in Uganda stood at 26.2% in January of 2021. As of social media statistics in Uganda, there are 3.40 million social media users in Uganda, and that is as of January 2021. And the number of social media users in Uganda increased by 900,000. That is over 36% between 2022-2021. I guess the pandemic again. And then the number of social media users in Uganda was equivalent to 7.3% of the total population in January 2021. And as of mobile connections in Uganda, there were 28.1 million mobile connections in Uganda as of January 2021. And the number of mobile connections in Uganda increased by 1.1 million between January 2020 and January 2021. And the number of mobile connections in Uganda in January 2021 was equivalent to 60.3% of the total population. Now I want to ask you, how feasible is this? I mean, OTT was introduced in 2018 and it was later discarded in 2021 because they fall short by 83% of their projections, and that was from about 428 billion Uganda shillings, and all they collected in the span of 2 years was only 49 billion Uganda shillings. So how feasible is this?
Yes, I think 2 things. One,
what is the success rate? Let's talk about that, the success rate of this happening.
I have to state that OTT was a bad tax from whichever way you would look at it, whether in terms of principle, why you're taxing, the effects it had and all that. But I think why it failed, regardless of the fact that it was a bad tax, we opposed it from the word go, was because it was a direct tax. It was a tax that you would feel directly. You pay and then you either access or don't access a service.
Yes.
Now, what that meant is that because of that direct feel, people were forced to make certain choices. It's like when you're paying your payee, you feel the pinch. And if you ask very many people that pay payee, if they had a choice,
yes,
they would not pay payee. But it's because they withhold it at source, where your bosses or your company withhold this without. But it's a direct tax that you feel, and every time you pay it, you feel like, if I had an opportunity, I would not pay this tax. Now, that's what OTT did, but it was a direct tax that you could choose not to use the service for you not to pay.
Yes.
And I think that's why we saw the decline in internet users. That's why when we saw decline in online transactions. That's when we saw uptake in VPNs
Yes.
and all that, because of that directness. And and then when that didn't work, that's where they repealed it and now brought it back as an indirect excise duty
Yes.
of 12%.
Yes.
And I think in a few months we'll see the statistics. Maybe when you invite me again next year,
Yes.
to see whether now there's been an uptick, because now you no longer feel it directly. Whether you use Facebook or not, you still pay that 12% as long as you buy data.
Yes.
So I think it was about the enforcement that. And like I said, usually V.A.T is an indirect tax. It will always come within the cost. Maybe what it will make is to make maybe services a little bit more expensive because it comes within the cost. But in terms of feasibility for V.A.T, it is paid by registered suppliers.
Yes.
And if we're telling I think a colleague of ours read a section that requires non-residents to register for V.A.T in terms of payments, then it means that it will be a little bit easier to collect that V.A.T. It's the same way you buy a bottle of water, for example.
Yes.
You as the end user, they will come and tell you this bottle is 1,000 shillings.
Yes.
On that 1,000 shillings, there is 18% V.A.T.
Yes.
You're not going to claim. You're not going to claim it. You're not going to do what. So, but then the bottling company eventually pays it because they know how many bottles they sold, they know how many. So even with this digital service tax, of course, like I said, right now I think the target is those big companies. They will pay because I think most of them have come up to register as V.A.T suppliers. They will pay this tax, but at the cost that the services will be a little bit more expensive because it's an indirect tax. It's tax that is paid by the final consumer. So if you consume Facebook, if you consume, for example, I know we've focused mainly on Netflix and Facebook and Amazon, but there are, for example, if you look at Amazon hosting services, everyone who has, for example, an account in the cloud storing data, everyone who is being hosted websites, they pay monies every year.
Yes.
So in terms of feasibility, I think it will work. Like most of V.A.T taxes have worked, because you don't have a way out of it. You cannot choose not to consume, because and it being indirect, they will just tell you, for example, your subscription has increased, your hosting fees have increased, and all that. But in terms of whether URL will be able to collect, I think it will be able to collect, but in the long run.
Yes, but don't you think it will be detrimental to some streaming platforms? For instance, Netflix did suffer a huge decline after they introduced the policy of taxing, or rather making password sharing taxable. So you have to pay for other people to use your password. They went on to have a number of subscribers drop from their platforms. They also went on to lay off about 150 employees. So don't you think it will be detrimental to some streaming platforms?
Yes, it will be, but what is the alternative? Because you see, the whole idea is to have everyone pay their fair share of tax. If everyone paid a little bit, no one has to pay a lot. And that's why I was saying that about 1.3 million persons are holding our entire economy. But that is very high on a person when you have a country of over 40 million people. Okay, let's say the adults are 20 million.
Yes.
But of those adults, only 1.3, and 1.3 I mean both persons and companies,
yes,
are paying tax to a tune of 25 trillion. So the idea here is that everyone should pay at least a little bit, so that no one has to pay a lot. And if, again, I don't sympathize with these companies because they have the money. They have not been paying.
Yes.
And if you look at, for example, how much Netflix made in terms of how much, for example, you are collected, you'll find that it is way, way above. And especially if it is a service that you're using, because someone talked about the infrastructure, for example, for bandwidth, where we are saying that we didn't have enough. Every time I would be on a Zoom call, I would tell people I'm going to switch off my video so that I save on the bandwidth, so that I can be able to talk properly. So, but here you have a streaming company, you're using internet to stream, it doesn't pay anything in terms of taxes. But it's using our infrastructure in terms of that fiber, in terms of that. So Will it affect their revenue? I don't really think it will, because at the end of the day, it is us that pay. Because it's a VAT tax, it's passed on to the final consumer.
Yes.
So for the companies, that may not really affect their bottom line. They will say, okay, you've added this, and they will find creative ways of making us stay there.
Yes.
Because they came up with their service, they will make sure that we remain on that service. But having said that, of course, like I said, at the end of the day, it is us that that pay, it being an indirect tax, which of course in most times is a little bit it's unfair. Yes. to the final consumer. So the other maybe question would ask, are there other creative ways that, for example, government is coming up with, of course, under the pillar 1 of the inclusive framework, to say how do we tax these companies directly.
Yes.
When they are creating value within our countries. Of
Yes.
course, we also have to bear in mind that these companies are way bigger than us in terms of our economies, in terms of the monies they have, in terms
when
of...
you say it like that, oh Lord.
Yes, we have to. If you look at what, for example, Facebook makes in a year, is like 3 to 4 times
our economy,
entire economy.
Yes.
So we are dealing with companies that are way bigger. They have way much resources. They will have but the idea is that since they create value in our countries, they have to pay at least something, and it's a lot of money when you look at it.
Yes.
If you look at the figures, for example, just between excise duty on mobile money withdrawals, excise duty on all fees and transactions, we've been getting about 278 billion as per 2019.
Yes.
And that is just for us using the mobile money platform,
Yes.
using mobile banking, and that would translate about 23% of the health budget. Now just imagine that a few of these other companies paid some little money. That would be tremendous, because even with our difficulties, we are creating or being charged or putting together 270 billion. So but we have to start somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have to start somewhere.
So do you think that these companies would require physical presence in our countries?
I think, and that's why I think, yes and no. Yes, in a way that, for example, that section of the law requires them to register as suppliers within
Yes.
the country. So in one way or the other, when you register as a supplier, you should have some bit of presence within
Yes.
that country. No, because again, we're in a digital, we are in
The digital era, so
in
they
a
don't
digital
have to be
era.
physically?
They can still be taxed without really having a presence here. But like I said, when you require them to register as suppliers, the implication is that they should have some bit of physical presence in the country. And I think they can do it. They have the resources to do it, and they will do it.
Okay.
Actually, I was privy to certain conversations where I think URA came up and told them to come and register a few years ago. They came, URA was not ready. So I think...
Uber came and they were not ready.
Yeah. So they were, but that time. But I'm hoping that now they are ready to have some of these go on. And like I said, we have to start somewhere.
Yes.
We learn through the process. If
Right.
we weren't ready that time, maybe we are now. And if we are not, what do we have to do to change? Because what is important is they have to pay something. They
Yes.
have to pay something.
They have to pay. Well, for my next question, it's more like a 2-in-1. So let's talk about the timing. In the current high cost of living in this country, do you think that this was the right move to do? And if so, because Finance Minister, that's Honorable Ramadan Gobi, said that they're trying to widen the tax base, and government did increase the revenue collection from 23 trillion to 25 trillion this financial year. And for my other question in it, what would be the other approach to, increase, our revenue collection, as opposed to, just adding more taxes on top of, and yet we're already struggling?
Yes, that is a very good question. And the timing, of course, we are going through very difficult times as Ugandans, but that is not limited to just us. That's the entire global sort of scenario, and it was made worse by the pandemic.
Yes.
So in terms of the timing, I will say two things. One, that at any given time, no one would want to pay tax. That's the truth. That's why at every given opportunity, if you can evade it, you evade it. If you can avoid it, you avoid it, because tax is a hard thing to do, to pay. But what mitigates that is that you expect services in return. You say, okay, it has been very hard for me to pay payee, but at least I will find medicine in hospitals. I'll not find potholes on the roads. There are those. The mitigating factor is that you'll find some bit of benefit in paying your tax. That you'll find a service. You'll find something, and I think that is where we are doing badly as a country. And ideally, no one would be complaining about paying tax. There are countries where they pay 40%, 50% of their income. They pay in tax. But what changes is that then you get the benefit of the tax. You get the benefit of me paying the tax. I don't have to drive on a
road with
potholes. When I want electricity, it's affordable, it's cheap, because it's what drives industrialization.
There's healthcare.
Healthcare. When we do education, we don't have to close our schools for 2 years. We can study remotely and all that. So that is what makes it easier for people to pay tax, because the truth of the matter is, governments need resources to run. That is the hard fact. That is the hard truth. What makes it easier is to say, okay, with this painful economy, we've given you this little money, let us have something. If we had that, this conversation would be a very easy conversation, because you'd say, I paid my tax, and then this is what I got in return. So two things, like I said, one, government will always need money to run, so we will always expect that it will try in more than one ways to collect revenue.
But when you say that governments need money and they'll try more than one way to collect revenue, how can we empower our citizens by draining their pockets, number one, and not reducing expenditure?
I was coming to that.
And not reducing government expendiction. I mean, the MPs just keep on, elevating their salaries day in, day out. They get exorbitant amounts of money to buy vehicles. We have so many national holidays in the country that all need a budget so that their celebrations, their trips abroad for, public servants, and we pay them. We pay them. Yet we are not seeing the effects or the benefits to us. So how...
Yes.
Somebody has to make it make sense. We understand that, but each year our national budget keeps on getting higher and higher and higher, and the common man is the one who is squeezed, yes, to fuel these budgets.
You're very right in that sense, and that's what I was just talking about, the accountability part of it, and that's part of what we've been doing, to be part of the process in terms of how do you raise revenue. Every year we make tax suggestions, proposals to government through the tax policy department at Ministry of Finance, through URA, even the finance committee in Parliament. We get alternative proposals to say, maybe increase here, maybe reduce here, do this, as from a civil society perspective, but also from a common person's perspective.
Do they listen?
Well, most of the times we've always agreed with the technical people, but when things get to Parliament, they never, the uptake has been low. But my point was that as citizens, we have to be part of these conversations. Every year when they're reading the budget, they're accompanied by tax bills. They will say, these are the proposals we intend to increase or to put across to raise this money that we are putting in the budget. So as ordinary people, we have to be part of those conversations to say, in terms of the tax bills, where are we in terms of how do we raise these resources? In terms of the budget, we also have to be part of those conversations, because the budget making process is a process that takes over 7-8 months. It starts from the departments, it goes to local governments, it comes to ministries, interministerial committees. By the time the budget ministerial statement reaches Parliament, a lot of consultations have been made, so that's where we also have now to have conversations, either with our parliamentarians, the assumption being that this is a representative democracy, or we even talk to our local government councils. We're on a certain show sometime, and someone didn't even know where KCCA division headquarters were in Kamwocha and all that. But the idea is that we have to be part of those conversations to make sure that money is raised in a way that does not hurt ordinary citizens, but we have to be also cognizant that money has to be raised. then it has to be allocated in ways that benefit us. If you look at the budget, for example, does it speak to the priorities of people themselves? Does it speak to human capital development? Does it speak to enhancing, for example, now we've said that we are in the fourth industrial age, which is internet, digitalization, automation and all that. Does it speak to those issues? So we have a conversation in that. And then after even it has been allocated, then we go back, is it being used the way it was allocated?
Yes.
So that is what YTJ, Youth for Tax Justice Network, we've been trying to do with young people here in Uganda and in other countries. But I'll give us, and maybe in part of the solutions, we've been having a campaign around, for example, tax incentives.
Yes.
Having a comprehensive policy on how tax incentives are awarded, for what reason they are awarded, for how long they are awarded, and then what happens if for the reason of that benefit has not been achieved. And this was meant to save resources as a country, because there are quite a number of reports that show that we are losing, or we are giving away up to 1% of our GDP every year in tax incentives. So the question would be, the people that were giving those incentives, what are they giving us back in terms of value, in terms of because like I said, the hard truth is tax will be there, but where we give relief, for example, I think Siatini has a report that we lose up to 2 trillion every year in incentives.
Yes.
But if you look at who gets these incentives, it's the big multinational corporations. It's the so-called investors that come, and then we have to guarantee certain monies. It's the even when these incentives are written within our laws, ordinary people cannot have access to that information. Ordinary people cannot afford to benefit. So that is one way we could look at and then we also harmonize it with our neighbors to say, if I forgive a certain company money or taxes in this country, given that we are, for example, in the East African community, they should pay in Kenya. If Kenya forgives them, which they should pay here, because it's the same market, it's the same community. So also having that sort of harmonization to say, and at the end of the day, we will not even have to borrow money that we've been borrowing to do certain things, because if we had a comprehensive policy to say, when we forgive you, we expect 5,000 jobs. If we say don't pay taxes for the next 10 years, we expect maybe 1,000 jobs. If after 5 years we do an assessment to say, okay, you are supposed to provide 5,000 jobs.
How many have you provided?
So far, mid-term. If we realize that you've not created even 30, we cancel. We say, come back to, because we lose twice as a government. We lose when we forgive certain entities their tax
and we also lose when they don't meet the targets,
when they don't meet the targets, but also we now have to tax people to cover up that loss, or we have to borrow money to cover up. So solutions will come into, of course, reviewing our tax incentives policies. We are not against tax incentives. We actually we advise, or we are in favor of giving incentives. For indigenous SMEs that we know will employ young people, we know that will do this, and because that is tangible, they are here, you can feel it and what. And then, of course, like I said, but it has to have a review mechanism. It has to have a time frame. They cannot be open-ended. We cannot say until we think about it. Then the second thing, and I think this is what we are now discussing, that we needed to bring people or entities that had not been paying into the tax bracket. The challenge is, like I told you, out of 40 million Ugandans, we can take 20 million, the adult Ugandans, only 1.3 are active taxpayers. That means that when URA says that we collected 25 trillion,
it's only from that
1.3, and 1.3 includes companies and people. So that means the burden is too high on these people, too high. And that's why when your paid salary, you feel the pinch. Government taking 30%, 40% away from you. So the idea was also, now, how do we get other entities, other companies, other people?
Broaden the tax base.
Yes. So that if everyone paid a little, no one has to pay a lot. And I think that's why now we are coming up with taxing these multinational companies and all these other things.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Alan Muheres. And there you had it, his opinion on the digital taxation in Uganda. And he's the team leader, Youth for Tax Justice Network. Well, we'll be still following this story very closely up until URA starts collecting their monies on 1st July.
We have to start from somewhere.
Exactly. So keep watching CTV. We'll be bringing you more details and updates on this conversation and this matter. But coming up right now is Hit or Miss with Priva and Aggie, and they bring you all the latest trends in fashion. You don't want to miss it. There's a sunrise at sea. Don't blink.